f5, you can have a move like knight to f3. One example is the Berlin defense. After castles, you get takes, not d4, sorry, you get rook to e1, knight d6, here, ignore the moves, don't really matter that much. Something like takes, you get d4, d6, rook e1, something like this, for example, to illustrate the point, where you get the same pawn structure of the 3 pawns. Now, white, of course, could try to play c3, but regardless, this is a structure that is not native to the Caro-Kann system. You can also get it out of e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, something like this, takes, d4, d5, and at some point something like knight d2, takes, bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, and something like c6 and c3. Now again, the pawn structure is very important because when you learn openings at the start, that dictates the piece play and where your pieces belong. So now back to this game that Phil plays here, we get c6, e5, d5, takes. If white were to play a traditional Caro-Kann, say d4, d5, knight c3, after takes, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, let's just say knight f3 and e6, for example. You can also play knight d7, but just to illustrate the point, something like knight d7, c3, e6, you'll notice the development is very similar. You get this pawn structure like could have occurred in the game had Phil played the move queen takes d6. But anyway, we'll show the actual game for a little bit just to talk about one more important point as it relates to the pawn structure here, which is that we get this position after knight d2. Now, if Phil were someone who played the Petrov's defense with knight to f6 or even these Berlin systems, he would no doubt know that the best move here is to play f5 over protecting this horse in the center. Again, this is an idea you can only know if you play the Petrov defense. Now, of course, if you're above a certain rating level, you'll be able to figure this out anyway, because when you played so many games, these sorts of concepts become very much second nature. But in this case, Phil did not know this concept, so he trades. Game was actually quite balanced, and he eventually would go on to win in a very fine fashion. But this is why you try to learn openings and specific pawn structures. This is also why I oftentimes, when people play the Caro-Kann, I try to suggest that if they want to add a second opening, they play the Scandinavian, because again, you get a lot of positions, or queen a5, sorry, I should say, where you have the same pawn structure similar to the Caro-Kann with these 4 pawns on these squares. So that's my little introductory bit. Big shout out to Phil. I know he's a big fan of the channel. I know his kids are as well, so just want to give a big shout out to him. And now we are going to continue with a couple of games. So let's get going. I'm going to hit the play button. Off we go. So first game today, we're going to be playing with the black pieces. My opponent plays e4, and now in honor, let's play the Caro-Kann in honor of Phil. We started the video showing one of his games. Let's play c6. We get knight to f3, and now I go d5. So I'm playing the move d5 here. We get the move pawn to e5, and now I have a couple of options. I can play either bishop to f5 or bishop to g4. I think in this position, the move that I'm going to play is I'm going to play bishop to f5. Bishop g4 is also fine, but the reason I'm not going to play that move is because in most Caro-Kann systems, the bishop goes to f5. Maybe the 2-knight system with knight to c3, you can put the bishop on g4, but other than this one specific system, there are almost no systems where the bishop goes there. So to further reinforce the point of where the bishop belongs in the Caro-Kann, I am going to put the bishop on f5. So we're waiting for a move here from my opponent. Let's see what we get. White probably should play the move d4. We get the move knight d4. Now, knight d4 is a very tricky move, and here I'm going to have to veer off the path of following the basics in this situation, because what I would probably normally play here is the move bishop to g6. This is not a common idea. That being said, you know what? I also kind of want to punish him, so I am going to play bishop g6. Now, my idea here is to play c5 to kick the knight. Most likely, he's going to push this pawn to e6, because otherwise I would push my pawn and open up the diagonal for the bishop. But let's see what we get. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I also want to punish my opponent. Now, he doesn't play the right move. He goes queen to f3. And this is also why it's important to have some general understanding of the openings, because when my opponent plays these moves like knight to d4, these are aimless moves. Yes, it attacks the bishop, but unless you understand a concept to further reinforce the point, it's just going to end up becoming a bad move. So I'm going to go e6, of course, opening up the diagonal for the bishop. Now we've created the perfect setup. Bishop is outside of this pawn chain. It's not on the c8, d7 diagonal. It's gotten out, so the pawn are good. Now both bishops are completely active, and here I have a very good position. Additionally, when you look at this position, you'll notice that everything is very guarded here. The pawns are guarded, the bishop is well placed. My opponent plays move bishop d3. Logical move. Now the problem for my opponent here is that he has this knight and this bishop. They're on d4 and d3, and this bishop on c1 is actually very passive. It does not have scope on either diagonal here. Now I'm going to play the move c5, very thematic move, attacking the horse on d4, and I also want to potentially put my knight on c6 later on. let's see what we get here. My opponent's thinking, and now he plays move knight e6. Now this is simply a blunder. I take the horse, I'll take back with the pawn, and at this point I'm simply up a piece. Now at the beginner level, that doesn't mean this game is over. The big issue for me here is that you'll notice I have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 pieces that have not been developed yet. So even though I have the extra piece here, I need to be very fast with my development. So you got to move queen g4. Now there are many ways to play this position, but what I'm going to do here is I could move the king to f7, but then there are ideas like queen f3. So I'm simply going to give up this pawn. But the reason I'm so overprotective of this pawn on e6 is that this pawn is the base of the pawn chain, basically the pawn that's furthest back that guards everything else. So for example, if I had a pawn on c4, you would notice I have a chain of 3 pawns, but the base is the one that guards everything at the start. So I decided to guard this pawn. Now if white were to take on g6, I would slide the queen over, offering the trade of the queens. Instead we get d3. I will go here anyway just to protect both of these pawns from being captured. And now the goal is to start developing the knights and get the king out of the center. We get queen a4. That's a spite check. I'll play knight c6 here, developing the knight. It's guarded by the pawn and potentially pressuring the pawn on e5 later on. We get queen to b5, and now I have a couple of options. Now the move that I'm going to play here is very simple. I'm going to castle my king. Reason behind castling the king here is that my king on c8 guards the pawn on b7 here. So now I've finished the development on the queen side. We get this move d4. I just take here. Everything is guarded. Pawn on c5 guarded, pawn on b7 guarded. So I'm following all the basic themes. Now my opponent plays queen c5. I take the queen here, and my opponent chooses to resign. Let's go ahead, next game, and let's keep the show going. So I have white in the second game, and now this time I'm going to play e4. Now in our last speedrun video, I played the Vienna to great effect. I don't kind of want to keep playing the same openings over and over. So now we're going to go back to some basics. I'm going to play the move knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. Now, as I've said before, e4, e5, they're very limited options when you're playing with the white side. I think the Vienna with knight c3 and g3 is good, and the Scotch are probably my two mains. You can play the Ruy Lopez as well, but I think playing the Ruy Lopez is a little bit too much for a complete beginner. The other option besides playing the Scotch here is playing the 4 knight. So I think let's go for something different. I'm going to play the move knight c3. My opponent goes d6, and now I play the move d4, and at this point both the diagonals are open for my bishops, and my position is looking very promising. We're waiting for a move, and here my opponent plays bishop g4. Now this move is actually an excellent move that I kind of overlooked in this position. I forgot he could play bishop g4. I was kind of expecting him to trade everything off on d4, but this is very tricky because now the knight is pinned and the pawn on d4 is under attack. So here, let's think about this. Now, again, I need to keep in mind this is for beginners at the very base level. This is not about intermediate or advanced, at least not yet. We will slowly get there over time as we play more and more games. But since this is at the complete beginner level, what I'm going to play here is I'm simply going to go pawn to d5. Now, the reason I'm going to play this move is I attack the horse, but I also avoid any threats on d4. We get knight d4. If I take, I lose my queen. So let's go bishop to e3. My queen guards the pawn and the knight here. I have to take with the pawn, and at this point the material is still